Welcome to the Concussion Legacy Foundation webinar, Helping Your Child Cope with Post-Concussion Syndrome, part 2 of our 2-part series. I'm Dr. Chris Nowinski, CEO and co-founder of the Concussion Legacy Foundation. If you're tuning in, you likely have a child struggling with post-concussion syndrome, or PCS as we're going to call it throughout the webinar. We know you may feel helpless and overwhelmed as you watch your child suffer with PCS, and it's our hope that you leave this webinar feeling supported, less alone, and empowered to help your child. Throughout this parent webinar series, we're talking to 6 different families about their experience caring for a child with PCS. Today, you'll hear from Richard and Beth Hussey, Andrea Lustig, and Aidee Dengor about the different ways you can best support your child through their recovery. We asked our parents what hard-earned lessons they'd share with other parents. Some of those answers overlap, but most were unique, and we've organized the interview so each parent is sharing unique ideas. If you haven't already watched part 1, you'll want to hear from those other 3 families too, and you can find those recordings on our YouTube channel and in the chat now. We also have a library of resources on our website featuring our medical director, Dr. Robert Cantu, on the symptoms, treatments, and risk factors for PCS. You can find that content, the URL on your screen now, concussionfoundation.org/PCS. And to hear directly from someone living with PCS, we have a new series on Instagram filled with tips, strategies, and stories of recovery from CLF Communications Manager Julia Manning, who was first diagnosed 3 years ago. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at Concussion Foundation to check it out. Another way you can connect with us and other families experiencing PCS is through our brand new PCS resources group on Facebook. We'd love to have you join, and the link is on your screen and in the chat now. And finally, a quick note to let you know we're recording this webinar and plan to send it out early next week to the emails with which you registered. So now it is my pleasure to bring in our first guests. Richard and Beth Hussey are joining us from Memphis, Tennessee. Richard is a member of the CLF Board of Directors, and both Beth and Richard are connected to our cause because of their daughter, Gracie, who was just 7 when she suffered her first concussion. Gracie went on to suffer several additional concussions during her youth soccer career before she was forced to quit the sport. And alongside Beth and Richard, Gracie has become an advocate and a voice in the national news for our Safer Soccer campaign, which aims to educate parents, coaches, and soccer stakeholders on the benefits of delaying heading in soccer until at least age 14. Gracie still works daily to manage her symptoms, but has learned many coping strategies along the way and just finished her sophomore year of college. So hello, Richard and Beth, and thank you for being here to share your nearly decade's worth of wisdom caring for a child with PCS.
Well, thanks for asking us, Chris, and thanks for all you've done for us and so many others and through CLF and all the great work you guys do. Happy to be here.
Appreciate it. So we talked in a pre-interview. So tell me, we'll start with the many social pressures that kids face and how that might stop them from being honest about how they're feeling. You know, with an invisible injury like PCS, it can be hard for others to see how seriously your child may be suffering. So what was Gracie's experience, and what advice do you have about pulling your child out from school and from sports?
I think it's really important to be an advocate for your child. I think it's hard for them to process what actually is going on. They're feeling pain, but yet don't really know how to express it a lot of times. Their peers don't really understand either because they look normal and they don't have a cast or most times a bruise or anything like that. And so I think it's kind of one of those things, it's pressure to still perform, still to academically be there, I guess socially and academically. And I think as a parent, you know your child and you have to be the biggest advocate in the sense of you have to communicate for them and encourage them to communicate, support them, and just let them, you know, let the coaches and the teachers and the friends know, just so that a lot of times they want to support, but if the individual is not being honest or letting everyone know how they feel, then it's hard to know how to support the child as well.
Yeah, you mentioned you had to be firm with a lot of people in helping Gracie out. Tell me about that.
Yes.
Well, I think the first mistake that we made, looking back in hindsight, is that whether it's a coach, a teacher, administrator in school, or friends, you expect that they're going to have a grasp of what's going on, and that they may have knowledge that you don't have, and the fact is they don't. And so that's why organizations like CLF are so important. You almost need to go get an independent outside source for information about what's impacting your kid, because all too often, whether it's a coach in a sport or a teacher in a classroom, an administrator, we just assume that they understand what's going on and they're equipped to help us deal with it. In fact, they're really not. And so that's why when we say be firm, it's you have to be active and you have to be involved and you have to utilize the resources that are available to you to go make it happen, because your child has got the social pressures, as Beth indicated. They don't really understand what's happening to them. And then the environment around them is not a resource that's really equipped to help manage the situation.
Yeah. And I know you were an advocate for a whole lot of changes with Gracie School and in their community. So you also talked about an important lesson for parents is about setting routine. You know, managing the day-to-day can be very difficult when your child is unable to go to school or participate in the activities they're used to. Can you talk about the benefits of that routine and how you guys managed?
Yeah, I think it's important when they are isolated from their kids and they're at home to, like you say, have a routine, not just really allow them to stay in a dark room. Yes, you know, pull them away from screen time, and that is important, and resting, but also just getting fresh air and just keeping like their mental state healthy with exercise. If it's just walking, you know, around the block the next day, maybe 2 or 3, you know, times around the block. But I think that's important. I think that you have to keep routine, you have to be consistent, and you can't give up. And you have to just know that there are going to be good days, bad days. Some days will be better, but you just have to have confidence in that and just stay in the routine and just fight through it and be consistent.
And to give some of that perspective, like how much was Gracie's routine affected? Can we talk about what changed in her life when she had the big concussion and the first post-concussion syndrome?
Her routine from going to school, she was homeschooled for quite a bit. The weekends, hanging out with friends, she wasn't doing that. Playing sports, which was the biggest part of her life and where she really felt confident and successful. That was, you know, she couldn't practice or participate in the games anymore. She really couldn't go to the games because she was sensitive to light and noise, so she couldn't even be there to support her teammates. So it was hard. It was really hard. And she felt like she was, you know, completely taking, you know, she lost a lot of her I guess her friends, in the sense that they were still playing sports and doing their things. So she made new friends, the girls that weren't practicing after school and you know, weren't on the team and had more free time to hang out with her. But it was really hard, I think, emotionally, physically, and mentally during that time.
So she sort of had to create a new life.
Yes.
Yeah. I would add, Chris, that, you know, as your child, depending on what age they're going through it in formative years and maturity and friends, you know, Gracie was going through it 8th and 9th grade, sort of that junior high to early senior high time period, which is a tough period anyway. And as we reminded her, or tried to teach her, you know, life moves on pretty fast for an 8th or 9th grader. So if you're not in a fray, whether it's on a sports team or going out with your friends, you know, those kids move on. And when you're not able to move on with them, that's why what Beth says about the routine and taking care of yourself and not sitting in a dark room and feeling sorry for yourself is so important.
Yeah. So, you know, I know a lot about how far and how hard you work to help Gracie get better. And I think one of the lessons that you told me about was that PCS recovery is not linear, right? And so one of the frustrating parts for both you and for the patient is that there's a lot of setbacks. So can you talk to what advice you give to parents about understanding the uncertainty that comes with PCS recovery, what your experience was?
Yeah, I think that you have to have a good relationship with your child and be supportive and understanding, and realize that, you know, it's hard for them to be honest in the sense that they have to express how they're feeling. A lot of times everything is so fuzzy and the pain is there that they don't really know how to communicate it. And I think with Gracie's, it was never the same with each concussion. So she thought she had a handle on it, and then she'd have different symptoms and different setbacks. And I think, you know, as a parent, you have to be patient and understanding and supportive in the sense, and not frustrated. Because it's hard when you think, okay, 3 days, this is great, we're out of it. Your daughter, son's feeling better, and then all of a sudden they wake up, they have a horrible migraine that lasts for 48 hours, and you think, you know, how did this happen? Is it really happening or isn't it happening? I think it's hard for everybody, the whole family, because you want to be supportive, but as you think that, you're out of the clear, then the setbacks can come and there can be days, weeks, and it's really frustrating. So I think as a parent, I guess my advice is to be understanding, compassionate, supportive, because they are having a hard time dealing with it, and they really aren't going to be open with friends and teammates. And so I think I had to kind of talk to Gracie and earn her trust, and let her feel like that she could trust me and talk to me, and that I wasn't going to get upset or frustrated when it's easy to do, and just realize that she did not want this to happen and hated it, hated every bit of it. But I think you have to become a friend to your child and let them be able to trust you so they will communicate openly.
And every kid's reacts differently. The brain is, in many other injuries, you have milestones. You can get an X-ray and show that a bone is healed, so there's a great unknown. That's why, as Beth says, the integrity, the honesty, get them to be honest with you about how they're feeling is so important, because you don't have the guidepost and the guidelines that you have with a lot of other injuries that a kid may have, a broken arm, a broken leg, an ankle, or whatever. It's just very different.
Yeah. And how did you, I know there are a lot of setbacks. There are times she thought she was getting better and then suddenly she wasn't. I mean, how did you get through those really tough times?
It was hard. Sometimes they're easier than others. I guess just a lot of patience and, again, routine, exercise, fresh air, encouragement. She got a therapy dog that was great, and it's still really helpful because Gracie still suffers she and her dog has been a huge part of her recovery. But I think realizing that she, I guess when she would feel bad or have a migraine, would remember when she felt well. And so remember that she did get to that point. And if she was at that point at some time, at one point, then surely we'll get back there. But again, there's so many things like with migraines, weather, she just secondary things that happen with concussions, and smell and loud noises. And again, she could think that she was doing great and go to a sporting event and it was loud and the lights, and she'd have a setback. And also just the physical, being exhausted. She would go and she'd push herself and end up so exhausted that for 2 days she would, be in bed and just feel horrible. So it's kind of finding the fine line, what you can do and can't do, and setting limits and really respecting yourself and being mature enough to know what you can and can't do. And I guess you get to the point where you realize that if you want to do something and choose to do it, then you may have to pay the price for it, or be mature enough to miss out on things too if you don't feel up to it.
Yeah. And so you look back now, and it's been a long time, and Gracie's doing great in school. She's happy. She was on our webinar talking about dealing with her PCS symptoms during the pandemic here. I mean, what makes you most proud about it, and what do you look back as your advice to parents is that last message about how you can get through these years together?
Well, I think a lot of times children, people, individuals with concussions, a lot of it is, I think, the way that they are wired. Gracie's very competitive. She's very headstrong. She's very determined. And I guess I'm proud of her because although she couldn't continue on the sports field, or I guess on the team doing that, with her grades, with other things in her life, she's gotten involved with volunteer work. She's been a mentor to a child that even when she was homeschooled, she still once a week would go mentor a child, because that was something that made her really happy and just gave her hope, and she would look forward to that. So I guess I'm most proud that she, as easy as it is just to kind of stand under the covers and stand in a dark room, she did get out, and to this day she still has symptoms, but she still pushes through, and she is very determined. She's still determined.
I think my advice would be that you have to come to closure on what you can't do anymore, what you may have to give up, and you have to embrace where you've come along the journey. There are a lot of different ways. Maybe where she is today is not where she thought she'd be in terms of her interest, where she spent her time, the ease with which she does academic work versus before. But I think you have to get through that tough period, both the physical pains and lingering symptoms, and embrace where you are in that moment. And I think that is kind of where she is today. And that was hard. Time heals some of that. And that's why Beth says you got to stay at it, and you got to build that trust, that relationship, and you have to be that advocate. And then at the end, you have to embrace that they're going to be different after it than they were before. And there are going to be things that were easy for them before that may be harder for them. But there are other ways where they change as a person that may be better than they were before. So that would be my advice, just looking at it from afar. And that's hard. That's hard for people to reconcile, but it can be done, and it can be rewarding at the end of a long journey.
Well, that's a great message to end on. Richard and Beth, thank you so much for sharing your story and your experience with our audience here.
Thank you for having us, and thanks for having you, Chris.
Thank you. Hope to see you again soon when we start traveling again.
Thank you. Look forward to it.
All right, because Gracie shared her experiences I mentioned on our previous webinar, so we're linking that segment in the chat. So now moving on from Memphis, our next guest is going to join us from New York. CLF New York Advisory Board member Andrea Lustig is here with us to share her experience caring for two sons who've gone through PCS, both of whom were injured around the 7th grade. Andrea also brings the perspective of being a brain injury survivor herself. She suffered her own concussion in between her son's injuries, and she's now making her first public appearance really since leaving the hospital last month for another brain issue. So Andrea, thank you so much for joining us. You look wonderful. And how are you feeling?
I'm feeling really good. It's great to get dressed and get ready and feel. It's a lot like what we just heard about concussion syndromes. I actually had a blood clot, but it's very much the same. You know, if I do too much, then I have a headache. It's reminds me of post-concussion syndrome.
Yeah.
Getting through it though. Yeah.
Well, thank God you're okay.
Yeah.
So, I know your boys, and we've had conversations about this. And I know one of the messages you want to talk about is that this is a really difficult injury to understand or to deal with, because not all doctors have a great understanding of it. So let's first talk about your medical experience. What advice do you have for parents who might not be here, getting the right treatment from their doctors, or getting the wrong message and being told their child is okay?
Well, I think we had this happen twice. And the second time I met Chris and I got the right advice and I got to the right doctors, the first time we were on our own, my son was in 7th grade and he had a sailing accident, hit with a boom. And his life, he started self-medicating himself by going into the dark and coming home from school and lying in the dark. His grades dropped dramatically. His personality changed. But the neurologist that we saw, who was the pediatric neurologist in our area in New York, told me he was fine. Did the neurological test, the typical one, and said, oh, he's fine. So we weren't sure, this is an age where there's so much going on with your child anyway, in terms of puberty and changes. And we didn't know, we doubted him, not the doctor, our son. And it wasn't till a school psychologist finally sent us to a neuropsychologist who was able to say, who did tests on Michael and said, this is post-concussion syndrome. And that changed everything. And then when James got injured, I took him back to the same doctor for some reason, because he was at the time the doctor the pediatrician recommended, and had the same experience. And now, as I said to you yesterday, Chris, every time I walk by his office, I want to punch him in the face, because, he had his standard treatment and he did that and then sent my son back to school, and everything went haywire at that point, because he wasn't ready to go back to school, and ended up missing almost a whole year of school and being homeschooled, and the same kind of story, having to give up sports. But back to the question, which is, we ended up at a concussion clinic at NYU and had doctors who took us through all the treatments possible and really worked with him and believed him. And that was everything. Because I think that if you don't get to the right doctor, you're really, it's an invisible injury. You can't tell. So you don't know how to treat your child, what is real, what is not. believe him. I mean, I'm getting to two of our points here, but just believe your child. That was the biggest lesson I got for it. And seek a specialist, someone who knows what's going on with concussions and the latest protocol. And I know James, he interned for you and he worked on that resource for parents, to find a concussion clinic. And that was so meaningful to him because of what he went through, having to go from doctor to doctor until we found somebody who could work with him and get him better.
Right. And you mentioned something interesting there. I think it's worth reflecting on, because this was a few years ago, but through our helpline, we still hear this all the time. And that's the idea that you were told, or your sons were told, they didn't recover as expected by the doctor. They didn't respond to the therapy they thought would work. And so he told you that wasn't the symptoms weren't due to the concussion. It was in his head.
He told us it was all in his head. He'd roll his eyes and like do that kind of a thing to us when my son wasn't looking. And I, at that point, had the experience with my older son, and I'd had my own concussion, and I understood very well what is happening and that he wasn't okay. And I guess this is another very important lesson. You know your child better than anybody. So don't let a doctor try to tell you your child is okay when you know that there's a problem. Find your child help. Yeah. Find the right doctor. Find someone who knows what they're doing with concussions and can help you.
And you alluded to this, but let's dig into it. And that's the idea that your sons were injured both in seventh grade. And seventh grade for any boy is a time of great changes and personality changes, hormonal changes. And so, how did you approach that constant battle of, is this them just normally changing, or is this due to that concussion? And how did you sort of find peace in that?
I don't know if I have found peace in it to this day, because I still have that question, because I do believe that there are, some of this lingers on, as we just heard with Gracie. But how did I come to peace with it? I think when I got the right treatment, I was able to understand that he needed this, that this was going to help him. And I think we talked about this, Chris, it changed everything, because I realized that I really had to be, as Hussey said as well, the advocate for my child. And that meant, I had to be the one to figure out how to get him back to school and what accommodations he needed when he got there. I think that was important for me, was I got very involved. I mean, it really became like a full-time job, and that, not everybody can do that. And I was working at the time, but it still took over my life, which we're always as happy as our happiest child. So I found that being involved, spending a lot of time with him, really helped him through it and let me see. I mean, again, I think it goes back to getting professional help that could guide us and let us know, what was what,
Right. No, and I think one of the things you mentioned to me the other day was, you had those questions about whether or not this was just him becoming, an old teenager, and but what you trusted in that it was worth investigating whether the concussion could be contributing to some behaviors that were not optimal.
Right.
And so going down that path and seeing the response to treatment sort of validated that you got to approach, and I think this is an important lesson for parents, you assume the concussion until it's ruled out, because brain injury will change how you behave. Right?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a great way to put it. Assume the concussion until you rule it out, and don't rule it out, because I think that there are, ramifications that are very long lasting. And I see it because of my history. I get it. A lot of parents who come and talk to me about it and think, oh, my son's just got to get through. It's been 10 weeks and he's, still having headaches, and I just can't wait to get him back into the game. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I know that, dog.
But you really have to realize that it doesn't go away that quickly, and there's no magic bullet to get him better. And you have to stay with it. And it's probably, if your child has post-concussion syndrome, it's going to be a long haul. but
Yeah.
you can make a difference. I mean, my son is now starting his second year of college and in great shape. And, you know, there are times I still wonder, you know, what is affected by his history of concussions.
Yeah, and then I know you learned a lot about pre-existing conditions and the idea that, you know, some things that may have been, you know,
Yeah.
may have been there but under control. A brain injury
Yeah.
can change
Yeah,
that.
like
So, tell me about,
ADHD and
yeah.
learning issues can, and I, through my research and kind of working and learning from Chris, I've learned that some of these issues will make you more prone to concussion. And same thing as the Hussey said about the competitiveness. Also, there are things within your child that might make him more prone to this. I mean, I remember my coach said, if he's going to go after every puck, he's going to get hurt. And that was in kindergarten. And it just kept on happening. But that was a part of him. That was, you know, how he, you know, hyper focused on it. And, but that, some of the ramifications of those things also happen around the same time as you're going through puberty. So it's very hard, again, to distinguish, but they're all affected by it and it all goes together. And I think you need a good neuropsychologist to help you through that.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think your points to getting that right team together, the right specialists, and engaging is important. I just, to share an aside, like I've been dealing with a bunch of helpline inquiries today, and a bunch of people have had long-term post-concussion symptoms. Like you sort of lose hope and you stop going to doctors, right? And because I mean, I dealt with this myself as a patient. You just like, all right, the last 3 people couldn't help me, no one's gonna be able to help me, and that's just not the case, right? It's sometimes finding that last doctor. Somebody's trying new. There's so many new approaches to therapy. So,
yeah, that's very, very true. And I had that with my sons. You know, enough. I don't want to see another doctor. But I just had to push and find the right team.
Yeah. I mean, the reality is that no doctor, and just sort of an aside, but no doctor can predict on their first visit what's going to work.
Yeah.
And so you gotta be exhausting and thorough, and that's what you did to help get your voice through.
And research. I mean, as a parent, learn as much as you can. You know, the resources are right there on your website. And I think educating myself and reading other parents' stories really helped me. Things like this. You know, if you're on the Zoom, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
You know.
And then, you know, one of the major points you made that I thought was really interesting was how you approached whether or not your boys should continue playing contact sports. And you know, so tell me about what that was like and what happened.
Yeah. Well, when Dr. Cantu actually told James he was not going to go back to playing hockey, and I, you know, through this whole thing had been talking to the school nurse, and I had said, you know, I don't know what to do because he can't play hockey anymore, and hockey is his life, and sports are his life. And she said to me, hockey is not his life, his brain is his life. And that kind of hit me. And it's a quote that I think about all the time because it still saddens me that he couldn't play the sports that he loved. But, you know, I realized that, and he realized over time that it was really the only decision that we could make. And it's hard. It's hard to find your new passions and, you know, find, you know, a social life that doesn't revolve around your sport and your team. But I think that it's, if it needs to be done, it's very doable. And I think another thing I said to you was all these sports that matter so much in high school don't matter once you get out of high school. Mm-hmm. So as much as they're a love and a passion, socially, there's not that, you know, not many, you know, maybe they have a lot of friends that are college athletes, but mostly they're going to be playing Frisbee in the quad or going for a run, things that they can do. And I think that that's been really great for my son, that he, you know, has found those kind of activities with his fraternity to be really fun. And, you know, when they got back on the ice, he felt really proud about how his, you know, being able to skate the way he could because of his past, but he's not playing hockey anymore. And he's found new ways to engage with sports and recreation and finding himself that way. But it's not easy. It's a really hard thing to do. No.
Again, it's another great success story, but you know, having watched you have to fight through it for so long. you
Yeah,
know.
and it was many, many years, and it took a lot out of me, frankly, but I persevered, and it's, you know, it's everything when you see your child happy and succeeding, and you know, not having headaches every day, and they'll get there. You know,
Well, what would your advice be then for that parent watching now who doesn't know if they can get through it, because it's too much, it's disruptive, it's a struggle, they're losing hope in helping their child get better?
I guess I'd say you don't really have a choice, and you know, you know, hang in there.
The parent, I can relate now.
Yeah, yeah. Hang in there, and this too will pass. I guess I would say, which I tell my boys often, and I've told, you know, and I've said to friends, this is a story in your life. It's not your life, and you will get through this. You know, it's think of your life like a bunch of stories, and this is just one story, and you'll move on to more stories, and this will be behind you.
Well, that's great advice, and I think a great message to end on. So thank you so much, Andrea. And again, I can't tell you had a plot at all. You seem great. I'm glad you're recovering.
Crazy times.
Yeah.
Yeah, very lucky. Feeling very lucky.
Stay well, stay safe, and stay out of the family for me.
Thank you. I will.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. So that's 2 out of 3. And now we are moving on to our final guest. Although I will say, if I could tell my staff, maybe throw a curveball, since we have a little time, we might want to do some Q&A at the end of this one too. So if you do have questions, throw them into the chat to the team, and they'll help us find the good ones. So our final guest is Aidee Dengor. She is joining us from New York City. Her son suffered his first diagnosed concussion also in the 7th grade. And his 4th very serious concussion happened during his junior year of high school. That was really something he had to fight through. So Aidee, thank you so much for joining us. Oh, I think we might have muted you, so let us unmute you. Sometimes we found this happens. There we go.
Is it okay?
Yes, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. How you guys holding up in New York City?
It's okay. It's getting better. It's getting better.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we talked, and you have a lot of great messages for parents. I want to start with, in our first webinar, we talked a bit about the emotional symptoms that are common after concussion, like depression, like anxiety. And it's also important to know that your child can have behavioral changes. What changes did you see in your son's personality? And tell us how you responded to that.
Good question. We didn't realize the severity of this last concussion right away. I had taken him to our pediatrician, although he had had concussions before, and she said if he does these things and it seems okay, if he can read for 10 minutes and you can increase it each night, he can go back to school. So we sent him back to school a little too soon. It was a mistake, a big mistake. And after he completed his first few days of school, there was a huge change in personality. My son is a pretty mellow, easygoing kid, and something happened. This brain injury caused, and all the stimulation I think he had when he was at school, socially and academically, caused a change in his behavior where he almost became manic. And that is so unlike him. It was scary. It was very scary. It burned out, but it lasted for quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And how did you respond to that? How were you able to sort of get through this new side of your son?
Well, my husband was away, of course, on a business trip in Europe, so he wasn't around to see. He just saw the tail end. I just tried my best to engage in the conversations and keep up. It was exhausting. I would almost just collapse at the end of the night. I would just try to calm him down, listen to him, and just be there for him. That's the best I could say.
Yeah. It sounds complicated.
It was
complicated. So yeah, well, I mean, you talked to me about this, like that daily emotional support. So a lot of the problems were emotional. So What is that, for other parents out there who are dealing with that emotional side? What does that day-to-day support look like, and how did you manage?
Well, I think I told you early on, maybe less than 2 weeks after the injury, it was Valentine's Day, and I was out to dinner with my husband, and I got a call from my sister who had been called over to our apartment because my son just had this outburst, this temper outburst with his older sister. And it was bad. And so I had to come home, and it was so unlike him. It was another example of this change in behavior. As I said, he was very mellow. And then I realized this whole thing, we are in a different ballgame now. This is not like his other concussions. This is scary. So that was February. I hardly left the house until he finished exams that year, end of July. I mean, I wasn't comfortable leaving for more than an hour or two.
Wow.
For a long time. Yeah. Because I didn't know if he'd be depressed, if he'd be angry, who knows? It's really bad, really bad.
Yeah.
Thank God it's passed.
Yeah. Did you ever think you were doing too much, or did you think, I mean, looking back, are you just so happy that you were there
I am so grateful that I was able to be there, and he was resting a lot. He was home a lot. I was working on a huge project at the time, so it was fine for me to be home and to just be there whenever he needed me. And as Andrea said, and the Husseys said, you are an advocate for your child. So I've tried to put it all behind me, but I spent so many hours a day dealing with doctors, appointments, school, SATs, college board, just so many emails and calls. It was a full-time job, a total full-time job for a long time. Plus it was his junior year in high school. He had just transferred from a boarding school back to New York, and it was a lot of work. Keep it all going, keep it floating.
Yeah. What did you do to take care of yourself? Or did you, or you just put it off?
I put it off. Once he finished his exams, I went to California and went to a spa for a few days by myself. It was amazing.
Really?
But I had a lot of support from friends through the period, but no, it was tough. It was tough.
Yeah, no, I mean, that caregiver aspect is something I mean, we've never really talked about post-concussion syndrome caregivers, but I think your story and the other stories are very clear. That's what you become. But at least versus other diseases where caregivers are termed, this one's hopefully temporary if you do the right thing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And you made apparently a lot of short-term sacrifices that
yeah,
work.
well, our kids are worth it all. So everyone would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So another important thing you learned was on the medical care side.
Right.
So you tried a lot of things. What approaches did you find to be most helpful in helping your son get better?
Well, we were lucky. Actually, school helped us the most. I had been trying to get into a concussion specialist, but had difficulty getting in. They had limited hours and too many patients wanting to be seen. So school actually made the connection for me. And once we got into this neurologist who specialized in concussions at a hospital for special surgery in New York City, it was fantastic. And they take a very holistic approach. There's a social worker involved, the neurologist doctor is involved, her PA is involved, and they set you up, depending on what your needs are, everyone's different, with PT if you have neck injuries, vestibular therapy for your eyes, the neuropsychologist or psychiatrist if that's necessary. We went to a center where they did acupuncture for him, that kind of special. They knew how to deal with concussion patients, cupping. We've tried everything. The latest thing, which we tried was the last few months, Botox injections in the head, which seemed to help with the headaches. I'm trying to think, is there anything else? Meditation. I had meditation lessons for my son because he has trouble sleeping. And so meditating helps him to relax and calm down. He has to stick with it, but That's another method that can be helpful, because sleep gets disrupted, especially if your child has any other issues like ADHD. It just gets worse. So, you know, we've
Wow, you're an encyclopedia of treatments. That's, you think you hit everything on our website. That's impressive.
Yeah.
But so the main takeaway there for the parents is comprehensive PCS clinics, you know, is important, but trying other things.
Keep trying different things. Keep trying.
Yeah, no, it's an important message. So I realized that I wanted to ask about caregivers, but I already asked about it. So what are the, well, I guess, how's your son doing now? I think one of the important things about these stories is that your children are all doing better.
Oh, so much better. I mean, he's not perfect. He still has setbacks. Salim, if there's someone who's going to get injured in a group, it will be him. If there's someone who's going to get hit in the head, it will be him. If someone is in his classroom in college, he's a freshman, and they stretch, they'll hit Salim in the head. This is just the way it is. But he's much better. He survived that horrible junior year and postponed taking the ACT until senior year. He did fine. He did well. He got into a school he wanted to get into, and he's happy. He still has setbacks, but he's doing really well. So it just shows, don't give up. It will be okay. Just
Yeah.
Bad day,
How does, go ahead.
tomorrow will be better.
Right. And how does he look back at this interruption in his life and this experience?
It echoes Andrea a little bit, because I think my son saw himself as an athlete, and not just hockey, but lacrosse. And I think lacrosse almost more than hockey, although he had the hockey injury and that put an end to everything. That's how he viewed himself as an athlete. It was so important to him. He loved it. It's how he spent his time. He was passionate about it. So he had to give that up. He's still searching for all these other things that he enjoys, but he found some other things. He enjoyed creative writing. He never put much into that before, and he became good at it. So he enjoys writing. He loves food. So, and writing and food. His senior year in high school, he joined together with another student, and they would interview neighborhood restaurants around school, and he had a lot of fun with that. So he's still finding himself and finding things that he enjoys. It's a process. Yeah.
No, it's an important perspective. And I know he runs now, because he was kind enough to run the virtual Cleveland Marathon for CLF. So please extend my appreciation for that.
I will.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, well, why don't you stick around, because we have a few more minutes here. And so I figure I've seen some questions popping up in the chat that I think our folks can answer. So if Tyler, if you could coordinate I didn't plan this, so this is a little impromptu. So our folks are still there. Slide them onto the screen. But the first question I see that's come in was, could pre-existing conditions like migraines increase the onset and severity of PCS? So Aidee, you know everything. You seem to know this stuff well. What do you think?
I imagine absolutely. Any sensitivity you have already in your brain, it just makes everything heightened, I think. Yeah.
I was actually just looking up the research today, so it's a timely question for a discussion I was having. No, that is the evidence. It's very clear that pre-existing conditions, especially migraines, can make you much more likely to have a protracted recovery. So we don't exactly know why, and frankly, for this discussion, it's not relevant. But the important thing is we've got to figure out ways to get rid of those headaches. Welcome back, Beth. We can see you now, although I think you are now muted too, if you want to unmute yourself. Now let me figure out how fast my fingers are. So did anyone do any 504 plans in this group or special education? No, I mean, homeschooling was obviously, it got so severe that 2 families had to do that. How did you make the decision to homeschool? Maybe that would be a good question. Beth, that would be a good question for you.
We made the decision, the school kind of suggested it, because Gracie was putting a lot of stress on herself, and the teachers could see it in her eyes and could tell at school that she was not feeling well, and they'd ask her and she would say she was fine and could make it through the day, but they could tell. And so they called us in and had a discussion, and the learning specialist just suggested, let's try Gracie doing the work from home. And so and it worked out really well. We had a tutor that she worked with so that I didn't have to be that person. And the tutor worked with the teachers in the school. So it worked out really nicely. And I think it helped her to feel like she had some ownership and was reporting to somebody else and then to the school as well.
Yeah. What about you, Andrea?
Well, James was at a intense boys' school, and 7th grade was kind of their signature year of like really destroying the kids in work level. So by the time he had missed 2 weeks of school, he was so behind, which sounds so ridiculous now, but at the time the school he had a new teacher who felt he was going to get so behind. So we hired a tutor to try to keep up. And it was very hard because he couldn't take tests or anything. But as I look back to it now, I think 2 things that stand out. One is we were able to do things, and living in this moment with coronavirus and everyone being homeschooled, he was reading Animal House, and our tutor happened to be a Russian civilization major. And James couldn't read, so he would have to read it to him, and they would enact it. And, using figures and it was actually really incredible. And I don't think James will ever forget that learning experience. So there were some moments about it that were terrific. I think that the other thing is that I don't know, what was I going to say? You don't really, you take everything to be so important when it's that point in your life. And again, it's what I said about being a story. This is a moment. And a friend of mine said, and they made James, before he could go back to school and go jump up to 8th grade, they made him on August 31st of that year, do a test on a book he read. And without, an intense book, I don't remember what it was, but he wasn't allowed to be tutored. And the dean of the upper school interviewed him on this book, quizzed him orally, and then said, okay, he can go into 8th grade. And I remember how nervous we were. And should we put him down a grade? Should we let him go forward? And a friend of mine said, this is 7th grade. This doesn't matter. The most important thing is for him to be with his friends and to have continuity, to graduate, to move on. And if you find that he needs an extra year at some point, he can get that year. But the academic work isn't the most important thing in the world.
No, that's a great point. And I have great sympathy for your kids, because I often mention to people, like when I was hurt in my 20s, I didn't have to keep up in school. And the reality is I could not have worked a 9-to-5 job for the first 5 or 10 years, like if I was under someone else's thumb. So I was very lucky to go back to a company that understood my situation and gave me some flexibility. And then starting the CLF, there are days I couldn't get out of bed for a few hours, I could sleep in. And that helped me get better. Another question that we didn't discuss yet, and it's an important one. Any foods or dietary changes that you made or thought were helpful? There's no good formal research on this, but anecdotally, obviously, diet matters for how you feel.
Maybe I know having a boy, my son was not, I researched all of that about anti-inflammation diets, and my son was not receptive to it. And at that point, we just gave him what he wanted.
Same here.
And just more of it?
Yeah.
Interesting. Beth, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think I tried to do a lot of research, just trying to take it to a health standpoint and try to get Gracie to eat healthy, which she did try to do that. But then there were times that she was so nauseous or her head hurt so bad that it was the comfort foods that she wanted. So I kind of gave in, and we kind of did the same thing. We would try to be healthy, and I did the anti-inflammatory, and we did a lot of essential oils. That helped with Gracie's sleep. Lavender and the diffuser, because she took a lot of medication that was supposed to help with sleep that didn't. So we kind of got off the medications, and I do think that the doctors did a lot of medication at us that didn't really work, but they said to be patient, or they would, make it go up in the milligrams or whatever. And so we did essentials, and that really did help with sleep and relaxing and her migraines. That's the one that I think helped.
Somebody did ask, how long were her migraines? How many years has she had them now?
She's had them, I would say she's at least 8 years, and she does Botox for her migraines, and she really thinks it makes a difference, and she knows when she needs to have an appointment, go get more Botox. So that has been really helpful with her migraines and managing them.
Yeah, and somebody else on the list, I don't know if they know Gracie's story, but ask about POTS. So would you mind just mentioning, we were discussing what the POTS situation
Yes.
was, Gracie?
Yes, Gracie was diagnosed with that. She would feel like she was going to faint, and she would faint, and she'd have numbness. And so we ended up going to Mayo, and finally she was diagnosed with POTS.
And POTS stands for, because I don't remember, postural or
postural
orthostatic.
Yes, I wish we were sitting right here because he could tell. But yes, it's a tracheo's symptom.
Syndrome.
Yes, syndrome. But I can't believe I can't even say that anymore. You try to erase things like that. But she was diagnosed with that. So she had to learn to hydrate. A lot of that became a diet situation. And so hydrate, and she would feel shortness of breath and migraines and nausea. And it's autonomic disease. And so she had to learn to cope with that on top of the concussion symptoms.
Right, and that's interesting that it's mentioned here, because we do have a lot of young people in our group who have been diagnosed with that. Mm-hmm. Right after concussion, not recovering concussion, and they get diagnosed with POTS as well. So, but it's very little researched area. One person, as a comment, somebody asked if they can share the name. We can share the name of the doctor and clinic that understood the difficulties after multiple concussions. So, yeah, I know you're talking, Andrea, about NYU. But I would mention to Jean, reach out to our helpline, concussionfoundation.org/helpline, and we'll find the closest. We basically know a lot of the clinics in the country, and we'll find one close to you that'll take good care of you. Because what's been amazing this year, the last decade, is the change, and you guys have all sort of lived it. And 10 years ago, there were not comprehensive concussion centers, and then with the increased awareness and dedication from the medical world, those exist now, and frankly, the difference of treatment you can get from that versus the solo practitioner who sees rare concussions is immense. And then let's end on a hopeful note. So Stephanie is asking, the first question is, does anyone have focused memory or anxiety 6+ years later? And I think the answer is all of your children still have some lingering symptoms here or there of varying degrees. Is there any reason to consider therapy again after so long? Is there any reason to have hope for recovery? I would say, I think I know what your answers are, but I'd like to hear them from you.
I think it can always help. It can help anybody, let alone someone who suffered setbacks like these kids have, such huge changes in their lives and medical conditions when they were young. So I think, sure, I'm all for it. I think it's great.
Yeah. I think the meditation is a really great idea, and something I'm really trying to encourage my son to help with anxiety and frustration. And the Unplug meditation app, which was actually created by a friend of mine, and it's incredible. And I think I'm trying to convince my whole family to download it and start using it. Because, as I said, it's just, even if you spend 5 minutes on that, I'm finding that that's really helpful to just kind of diffuse any issue.
Yeah. What about you, Beth? Gracie's still getting better, right? Slowly but surely.
Absolutely is. But I think like the anxiety and the pressures, I think that's just in our world that we live in. And I think that, even if they're more susceptible and, just with the challenges and just having the migraine, I think she gets anxious if she has a migraine. Is it going to last for a day? Is it going to last for 2 days, 2 weeks? Is it going to kind of be a snowball effect? And am I going to start feeling nauseous and, have other symptoms with it? So I think that she was never anxious before her head injuries, but I think now she does suffer with a lot of anxiety. And just for that reason, that it's kind of like, oh no, I don't feel well. Where's this going to take and how long is it going to last? And what setbacks am I going to feel? So I think, I think definitely anxiety is something that she still struggles with.
Yeah, and everyone these days. It's always
right, exactly.
And I guess I've had post-concussion syndrome for the longest, so I'll say that I'm 17 years since that concussion ended my career, and I look back and basically every 5 years I'm a different guy, and I feel better today than I did 5 years ago. I still get better. There's still some lingering symptoms. I still have a few too many headaches than I want. I still don't sleep as well as I'd want, but you'll just continue to get better and just enjoy the bits and pieces you get back, and don't worry so much about the ones you don't, because yeah, you never know. But I would say continue to fight the good fight on treatment and therapy, as you guys said, because better days are always ahead for those of us who've been taking these shots. And it's amazing when you have a parent who can help you get there. So thank you, and congratulations to you for all you've done for your kids.
Thank you, Chris.
All right, I'll just wrap us up here. So I want to thank my guests. You guys were all amazing, and those are great stories you've shared. And again, if you're looking for help with your child, please do reach out to our helpline. We are now able to give one-on-one support to everybody, and we're always fascinated by your stories and committed to finding you not only medical help, but our parents are all willing to be mentors. Our recovered post-concussion syndrome patients love mentoring and helping people maintain that hope. So it's really important to be able to have someone to talk to about this. We're also launching another PCS-based webinar series for June and July that will highlight different treatment options. So be sure to sign up for our PCS newsletter to receive announcements about those dates and registration links. I'm sure that link's going up now. And if you found this webinar helpful and you want to pay it forward, we always welcome your charitable support. We'll put a link for donations in there. But please do keep coming back. We've got more information to share. The depth of this issue is obviously so big. So we'll look forward to having some new experts coming on board in June and July that'll be able to teach us more about how we can get better. So with that, I want to say thank you again for joining us, and we wish you and your families continued safety and good health, and I look forward to seeing you back here soon.